It's the Dev Friday Show with Mark and Tim.
It is the Dev Friday Show. I feel like we should retitle this, Mark. I feel like it should be Just Two Developers and Their Journey with Artificial Intelligence. No, that doesn't have the right. Like two devs trying to not talk about AI, but they always do. Is that about where we're?
I was thinking that could be a good goal for today, is to not mention AI.
I've already.
But we already did it, so we're lost. We're done.
Already done this.
Yes, but I like the title. What, function stacking? I like it. Are we be talking about JavaScript?
I don't know. No, I mean, that's not what I'm thinking about when I put function stacking. I have a completely different concept there. We'll see if we even get to it. But you scared me because we were here somehow early, and you said that you had a hot topic for the show, and you're sure all of my coworkers are going to be interested in my take or something like that. And
spicy, Tim.
A spicy.
We're about to turn up the heat in here.
Uh-oh. This doesn't sound good. So, what do you want to just leave?
You just want to roll into it? Should we just roll into it?
Should we talk about what we've been doing this week?
Well, I think we should. I think, I was thinking about this too. We should, in the beginning of the show, we should kind of do a little bit of catch up because we don't talk during the week, because if we did talk during the week, we'd have anything to talk about on Friday. So it's our strategy. So yeah, what were you working on this week? Did you actually do any coding? Which actually will lead into my spicy topic.
Oh, did I do any coding this week? That's a good question. Probably yes, a little bit, right? So I've been This isn't going to help anybody. I'm telling you, this didn't want to start talking about AI, and I'm going to just do it all over the place. Apparently.
Well, I did have a good AI story my own, which I think I tweeted about this week, that it was an interesting experience going from GPT-4 to 3.5 in the same thread while I was working through a problem. That was a very interesting experience.
Really?
Kind of seeing the difference. Yeah.
Wait, it went in the thread?
Yeah. So what happened was I was working through, like I said, I've been usually I prefer just using GitHub Copilot, line by line, just kind of, for doing some autocompletes. I don't prefer to do like the big blocks, but first doing some of my Android examples in class, because I've been trying to get some towards the end of the semester. I'm trying to give my students as many examples as possible so they can use them as references when they are working on their final project. So I'm trying to just generate these Android projects super, super fast. So I've been using, and also with Android, or any large platform or framework that you have to, most of the work is just understanding, the libraries you have to use. It's not that, Kotlin is fine. Picking up Kotlin, that's actually not a big deal. It's the libraries you have to learn. It takes so much amount of time. So, using ChatGPT for that, just referencing instead of Googling and trying to look for documentation, actually is super, super useful. So what I've been having to do is actually been, okay, I want to have this type of application, help me start to build it, right? And so I've been actually using ChatGPT to just build out some template examples so I could use them in class and just, as a starting point. So I was working through this one of building like a bottom tab bar interface application to that interacts with the database and on Android. And so I was kind of building through the application, doing pretty good. And then I think I hit the 30. I think they have like a 30 message limit or something like that. There's 30 or 40 message limit. And they do warn you. They're saying, okay, when you open up the thread under and you specify you want to use the ChatGPT 4, it'll say, okay, this is limited to, I think it's like 30 messages per 3 hours or 4 hours. I don't know. There's some limit that they have, some cap that they have on that. And I was like, all right, whatever. I'll just do it, because I have been finding that I've been liking the results, and the speed of the results have gotten better too, which initially with ChatGPT 4 just felt like slow. It just kind of, the response rate. But that night it was actually pretty fast. It was like, oh, okay, that could actually work out well. So I was working through some issues, copy and pasting code, pasting code back in and seeing, kind of working through some issues. And it was actually working pretty well. And then I hit the limit, hit the cap. It was like, oh wait, you hit the cap. You can't wait for 3 more hours until we can, use version 4 again. But it kept me in the same thread and it popped me back out to 3.5. And it was interesting seeing the responses. And it felt like, version 4 was much more, I want to say, of an elegant responses, but I could tell with 3.5, it was much more brute force. It was like, it kind of just the responses it was giving me and the code it was giving me was like really arbitrary. And it just wasn't when I would give it like some code, say, okay, analyze this code. What is this doing? Or find out the issues that I'm not doing correctly in it. It'll give me good. It was giving me good responses back. And when I would do the same thing in 3.5, it was like, I don't know. I was like arguing with it back and forth. It just wasn't getting good responses. It was really, really frustrating. So it was really interesting kind of seeing the difference between the versions.
Is it just that it's understanding you better?
I think it was also repeating answers back to me. Like if it was giving me a response, so give me like a code block. I say this code will solve your problem. I was like, okay, well, no, that's what you gave me 2 or 3 messages ago, and pretty much it wasn't adapting as well. So it was a pretty interesting experience, kind of switching between the 2 different versions.
Since you pay for it,
Yeah.
I'm guessing that's why you can choose to use the ChatGPT-4, because
Yeah.
I don't see an option for that. I think somehow I had stumbled into, like, somehow I was using it once upon a time, and then it went away.
I wonder if
Because I
they
did
like
that-
occasionally open it up for users just for for doing some testing.
for doing some testing, because that one day when I ran it back and forth and gave it images and said describe this,
Mhm.
that's a ChatGPT-4 feature.
Mhm.
And then I tried to do it again the next day, and it's like, hey, I'm a large language model. I can't understand that image.
Yeah.
Like, but you just did. Like, I have a thread where that worked, and I'm guessing I had somehow stumbled into they were letting my user use ChatGPT-4 for a little bit, and now I'm back to what is it, 3.5, something like that. Super interesting to see.
So that was my experience, and I
Yeah.
don't want to spend the whole time talking about that, but that was a pretty interesting kind of seeing because I wasn't seeing the real benefit of the going from 3.5 to 4, but it was interesting to just working through a problem, and especially when you're copying and pasting code back and forth. So let's say if ChatGPT gives you some code, you take it, you modify it, you kind of work it within your application, and then you run into a problem, and you say, okay, well, this is the code you gave me. I made these changes to it, and you basically give it like an updated block, send it back to it. It actually does a real good job analyzing it and then understanding what may be wrong about it or what could be refactored. And it was like 3.5 just does it too, but it feels like it just wasn't as
It's refined.
I guess I want to use like word intuitive. Like it just
Okay.
didn't really like analyze the code analyzing part of it, especially from remembering its previous responses too. I felt like 4.0 does a lot better job of like understanding the previous messages in the thread and then not being so repetitive.
This may encourage me to at least try the plus, and maybe we'll get to that, because I ran it through some paces and was not impressed with some things this week.
I think it is good. Like the limit, that was kind of annoying, especially if I paid for it. It's like, come on, it's like $20 a month. I'm like, do you really have to have a limit on that? Because people who are paying for that, come on, why not just give it to
just
them,
let you go. Yeah. But we got here asking, what did we did I do any programming? Yes, a little bit. Not as much as I would want to, but following up on last week's podcast, I've done a lot more writing than I have in the past, because I'm keeping myself to at least write for 20 minutes a day, and then once you get kind of into it, it becomes more. But yeah, some of the code that I've been writing is code to analyze for just to pull out data of how the dev team is being utilized for support requests, things like that. Pull data out of Slack. And I already had code that did that. Changed a little bit of the format, and we use reactions. Kind of, it's not really. It doesn't replace an issue tracker. It's for real-time stuff, right? Like, hey, I think this is a problem. Okay, here's the answer. No, it's not a problem. You should make a real bug issue, or it is a bug, but it's not critical. We're not going to fix it here. Or, wow, that's critical. We're going to fix it now. And by Slack reactions, it communicates how we solved it, how we resolved the ticket. If it is a bug reaction that tells us, yep, we released code that fixed this bug. If it's a broom, we had to change some data in the database. Something got screwed up. And just to help us keep track of, well, how many times is support having to get real-time assistance from the dev team? How often are those things where we just like, oh, let's give you a little bit more context, and yep, now go off and create an actual bug report because it's not critical? How many times are those, oh, we had to fix code, or we just needed to change something in the database, which kind of clues us into there's probably an underlying issue here that we have to dig into? All that kind of data I pull from Slack with some scripts, and we changed a little bit of the format, changed a little bit of how that was going. So I had to update those utility scripts that I just run on my own computer right now and pull down to get some weekly stats from Slack. I also had to do a little bit of SQLing.
Ooh,
is that a word?
The squeals. You've been squealing, Tim.
I mean, the MySQL people say that no, you shouldn't say it that way. MySQL people say it's pronounced
Well,
differently.
that's why I like to do
What do they
Squeal
know?
now, because it's completely off.
Squeal?
Like it's not
MySQL?
MySQL or MySQL. It's just called my Squeal.
My squeal? Wow. They're not going to be happy with us at all. So I had to do some my squealing. We're pulling data from some tables, and I don't do a lot of querying. Like, I work at a higher level than that. Some devs would be like, "How could you possibly?" But nope, I just do. I know it introduces, and we could talk. Could have conversations around ORMs and
Introduces what? What were we about to say?
Using an ORM introduces inefficiencies, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm having a machine. I'm having
Mm-hmm.
it's just another layer, right?
Yep.
But it also introduces efficiencies in that I don't have to wrap my mind around that. And specifically the ORM we use, I don't even have to wrap my mind necessarily around the column names. I just have to say I'm querying by actually the property in the class that I consume.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what is in the database. I'll give you the property, I'll give you the value, you'll find it, and it works. Cool. Is it as efficient as me writing the query by hand? No. But where do we have those trade-offs? Is it more efficient for me to write code using ORM? That's a whole other discussion. Maybe we can have it.
Well, it's more efficient for you to write a stored procedure that you call.
What? That is true.
Yeah,
that is true. Then we can get into another discussion of stored procedures and how do you maintain stored procedures when they're not in version control.
I love talking about databases, which is interesting. I was talking to my students this week about that too, because we got to the database week of the class, and we're using a Supabase. I showed you that. Because they have a great kind of free tier, for doing hobby personal projects.
Is it Supabase is like a Firebase like thing?
It's a Firebase alternative. It's an open source Firebase alternative. That's what they call it. But I like it because it's actually built on Postgres. So it has Postgres behind the scenes, but then it has its Supabase's API, which you can access it kind of like you would do a Firebase, the Firestore. So it kind of gives you, it's definitely not a NoSQL key value based system, but the API that Supabase gives you it's very easy to use, and it basically provides, like we're talking about, that abstraction on top of SQL with its own API that you can access. But if you did want to, even I think the stored procedures, I was trying to do that to do a little bit of a test I could show the students, but they popped up a board saying, okay, the stored procedure functionality is experimental, so don't use it in production.
You may screw up the API, I'm guessing, with some weird stuff.
But thinking back
and stuff like that are really useful.
Yeah, because when it was my first job, I told my students that my first job out of college was being a database programmer, and that taught me so much. Working with relational databases, and like I said, understanding when a stored procedure is like the best, the best use of trying to add a functionality, trying to get data, or try to do, to write some transaction that you want to do on the database, and think about when you should be writing the queries within the application, or offloading that as a stored procedure that then you just call remotely with a call from your application. Along with
that, there's like views that kind of give you a virtual table made up of other data, and then, like I said, where you get there is how is that in version control? Like, how do you know what changed, right? Because everything then is a migration of sorts, and did it work? What's the state of the database? There's no way for me to very easily see that, at least in the context of being a developer. And then you have that, we have a DBA here, and this is just how the database works. Just trust it. This is just how it works. And yes, the side effect of inserting this data is they're going to have these other data that's going to be inserted too, because we have triggers, run stored procedures, and all that kind of stuff. So there can be a lot of value there. There's also that whole, then all of a sudden you need a different person managing a different thing, or if your team's all managing, it's like, you need to know what's going on. It needs to be documented someplace. There's a lot of how do we get to this? I was writing some SQL. I was squealing.
I was squealing too this week. Yeah,
really
great. It's great. We're doing the same thing. I know.
And I don't have as much. I don't think it wasn't in the formative years of my developer career. I wasn't doing a lot of database stuff. I've pretty much just viewed it as it's a thing that I don't mess with much. I understand how they work. I store stuff there, right? But I usually solve it in the code.
So were you always on the ORM? Yes.
Always is a strong word, but a lot of times, yes. At least in using things that abstract the data away, the database away. Even early on, I was using what would be called, I think, your table gateway, row gateway model, or pattern,
Hmm.
where you have when you say that, it's essentially active record without
Hmm.
some of the niceties of active record. Doing that, and then I discovered, ORMs are really cool in how they abstract it completely away.
Yeah.
And if you're not a PHP developer, I tend to like Doctrine, but if you're not a PHP developer, that is just the port or inspired by Hibernate, which, if you know what Hibernate is in the Java world, I don't know. .NET has a similar thing that was inspired by Hibernate. It's a very established pattern
Hmm.
that, again, I am going to admit is not as efficient as making the queries yourself.
So it's interesting. Since you are more of an ORM guy, I'll call it ORM.
Orm, yeah, let's go with
ORM,
that.
right?
Yeah, that's the term
And,
people use.
and
Yeah,
I'm more of a squeal guy.
You're
Uh, so the one thing that when I was doing some RM work with, I think it was back in my Rails days, that's where I first discovered.
is
I
that
think,
really in
well,
Rails? Is it really an Orm?
no, I think it was
It's active record.
I did do it in .NET too. I did do it with ASP.NET. Yeah, I think I did it. Started to do it back then, and then immediately then Ruby and Rails, because they have that active record that's so tightly
Right.
wound in their framework that yes, you kind
Yes.
of have to use
Which
it.
is the issue of active record?
But what I found though is like, yeah, it's super. It's a great experience, especially to get started with it and to get something, get that database connection working, create your data models, start writing your methods for accessing doing your queries, and it was super easy and super, just a nice flow to kind of get into. But then you could where do you think is kind of where you could take it to an extreme level where you start to cause some issues, especially with performance? How should you not use an ORM where you could start to cause some performance issues? Or where do you see developers start to get a little bit too crazy with it? Because I definitely fell into myself where I kind of like, okay, I started to get a little too lazy, started to
But
make
to be clear, like ORM and active record are different things.
Yes.
They're both abstraction layers
Yes.
around the database, right?
Yes. But when you start doing, like, say, let's say if you have, okay, let's just kind of step out. If you have, like, say, data model, a class that's basically models your database table, and then you start building those relationships between the tables within your code, that could start to run down a path where you could start to have some huge performance issues.
Yeah, developers that don't realize the impact of what they're asking from whatever their abstraction layer is, whether it's active record or an ORM, where you're like, hey, I'm just selecting this data. Do you know what that's actually doing, though? However you have it configured, or if you're selecting through another object, is it inefficient in that you're making a query to get back a bunch of things, and then are you looping over those and then asking for a relationship that's lazy loaded? If that relationship is lazy loaded, then what you essentially did was one query to get back a set of records, and then those many queries, right, to get back the next thing. When you could have, if you were just sitting down saying, I know I need all this data, you would have done an appropriate join, right? So then you have to understand. I guess maybe that's
also,
I tried to articulate this before,
and I remember too, I could definitely declare if I wanted to do a join
you can totally do that
within it, but then also didn't do that behind the scenes too, with you not really being aware that it was doing it.
It depends on what the abstraction.
Because I think I ran into that kind of issue in a bunch of places where, like, it started to have some performance issues because I feel it was doing some inner or outer joins when I didn't know it was doing it.
Because there's the one side where if whatever layer you're using understands the idea of lazy joining, right, or lazy relationships, that's great. Because yes, if I want back all the users, I don't necessarily want all the things that they're related to. And if it doesn't, then you're in big trouble, because you're like, if a relationship means it has to be loaded, then yes, asking for the user is terrible. And so I think where devs can really get into trouble is it makes it easy to work with data. These abstraction layers makes it easy to work with data and per system. You don't have to think about how they work. But if you don't know how they work, then you end up using them incorrectly. Like I said, if it's a lazy thing, you end up pulling back a bunch of records and then traversing a relationship that basically requires a query per traversal. So you look like, you looped over 100 users. Well, you've got, what is that? 101. I think if there's maybe there's a term that refers to that type of inefficiency. You have that many queries. Or the flip side, if whatever you're using doesn't, once you establish a relationship, it it is eager about all of that, then you don't realize that pulling back you think, I just want to pull back a user, but you pull back a user, you pull back all their comments, you pull back, that's terrible too, right? Like that's completely, so not understanding how it works. And even when you do understand how it works, I'll tell you, there's some interesting things you can do in with Doctrine, where you actually want to model relationships in a way that is not how the relationship really is, because of some inefficiencies that it just doesn't know, and it would make some inefficient joins. So understanding how it works, yes. It's also inefficient where it's like, hey, there's a layer between it. So if you're like, hey, I just want this data, but you're using an ORM, you tend to say, well, I'm gonna get my entity back, and I'm gonna extract the data from there. If you're doing a report, maybe you just want to SQL the thing, and a good ORM will let you do that too. And you know, I'm not pitching Doctrine here, but Doctrine has plenty of ways to write a query in a ORM style, where I'm talking about my objects and my properties, but then say, nah, I want to get scalar data back. I don't want objects back. I want you to take this column, which is really all the properties. So I'm essentially saying, I want you to take all the users' properties maybe and sum them. You know, like get the selection of users. Maybe they have a count on the row of something that they have, and sum it all. And you can tell it to do that, and it'll do that, because under the hood. But again, are they going to be the most efficient query? I don't know, because it's code that's writing that query at that point. And then maybe you just want to write it directly. So yes, there's inefficiencies with ORMs, and whatever abstraction layer you get, there's inefficiencies.
So if you can think about this, have you ever seen anything really crazy? Like when it comes to, like, when you looked at like a client database and looked at the schema, and if anything kind of really, you looked at that and be like, why is that?
Oh, every day.
What's one of the craziest things that comes to mind?
No, I don't know. Like there's always times you've seen data. You're like, what exactly were they thinking? Especially on legacy projects, right? Because you have the cruft of, we had this data, we still kind of use it, but we have this data which is better now, but I think some code still uses that, and you can't get rid of it. So you just kind of grows, and it's hard to get rid of the old data. Weirdest things that I forget. There was, I'm trying to remember a project I had to work on years ago. I was debugging it. I feel like I can't remember what the issue was. If it
Two
was
things that stood out
that
to
were
me.
the same columns, and it was so much.
Yeah, I remember having a table that was like, it was close to 100 columns.
That might be a bit much.
Yeah, and to me, because it was just legacy. It was kind of like, it was back in the day, but like they didn't want to abstract it, but it was a crazy amount of,
how much data was in that then?
It was a lot. Well, I work for a tax company, Tim.
Because it was like, if you got 100 columns and you've got a crap ton of rows, right?
Yeah.
You can't do anything with that table. Yeah. That table is gonna be so slow. Slow.
I know, but it was and then all the issue too, like having like weird table names that were like A_1 or 2 or something like that, weird stuff like that. I'm like, oh my gosh. Because I think it's also tables that like people created just for maybe testing purposes, or for maybe like,
and then somebody started
temporary tables, like for like a temporary table, and then it just never went away.
Yeah, that's not good. That's not good at all.
Because I remember using a lot of temporary tables when I had to write migrations. So when you have to, let's say, you're going to be doing
shift stuff into the temporary table and bring it back in the real table.
And then maybe that's what happened. Like they were using these temporary tables just as like ways to just move data back and forth when they're doing different migrations or refactoring the database.
They never got rid of them.
Yeah.
And that's that is the stuff that I don't do a lot of.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I mean, it is for sure important and a great skill to have, knowing the ins and out of that. I mean, I know what normalized form is. I know that you don't always want it, right? Like it can be, getting to like a completely normal form may make your data really inefficient, right? It's all these trade-offs, right? Like,
how do you feel about the blob, Tim?
How do I feel about? Wow, we are deep into what I use it. What do you want? What? I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was supposed to have an opinion on that.
Well, because that's something I never did. But then I was like back in when I was doing a lot of database work out of college. That was back in 2000. Well, I graduated in 2000. So let's say the first 5 years, between 2000 and 2005, that's where I was primarily doing a lot of database work. And so the idea of storing using a blob type for a column, and just storing just a lot of information, either that is text or JSON now that's being used, just dump like JSON into a column, or using for byte data. Yeah.
Right.
Which I did see that. I
Right.
did see that occasionally, like for just storing like user profile images.
Oh, like storing the image there instead?
Yeah. Which I don't. But that would just increase the
That
database
just
size.
feels to
Yeah,
me
it
like
just doesn't.
but I may
did
be
see it,
wrong.
and
I'm
I didn't. And I didn't know at the time. Like I didn't. Like I said, it was already kind of in place. That was kind of just a thing that they were doing. But I was like, but I was just thinking about now how it's a little bit more developers. You're using like a blob column. If you do have like a lot of JSON, you just want to have associated with that record and dump that into it. But it still kind of feels wrong to me to do that. I don't know.
Oh, really? What about, if you're playing with Postgres, and I think more modern versions of MySQL have it too, like actual JSON columns where you can put JSON data and then query into them.
Which I was just taking a look at this week. Yeah, that's something that's new to me too. So yeah.
Because, and I know it's not new. I'm saying it's like it's new, but it's been around for a while now. But it's a great kind of mixed mode where it's not a document store, but you can put unstructured data in there and kind of query it, which is to me seems to be very, very useful. But no, I have no opposition to the blob field. Sometimes you just need to store a lot.
It just feels every time I see it, it just makes it feel a little weird for some reason.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, it feels naughty. I don't know. I don't think I should do that.
Because you couldn't give it a type and you couldn't give it a limit and you couldn't say it's not going to be more than these characters. I mean,
or from a performance standpoint, when you are, I know if you don't select that column to bring it back, you're not from performance standpoint. But even just for querying, I'm just wondering behind the scenes, like from a space structural standpoint, does it really? I don't know.
I kind of feel like the database people make that efficient, right? Like,
yeah,
I don't mean users. I mean like the actual people that are programming how data is stored. I'm hoping they made that efficient because it's like, how else do you store your blog post? Unless you
structured format, Tim.
But I mean, like the content of your blog post. How do you store the content?
Oh, within
it's got to be
one big text or details or description or summary field.
Oh, okay, but no, because I'm showing how little I know, right?
But when I say a blob, I'm talking about like a lot of data. Like you're talking, let's say over a megabyte of data.
Okay,
but if you're just storing like a blog post as text, you're talking what? Maybe like 10 kilobytes.
And maybe I'm just thinking on the.
That's just a guess. I have no idea.
Are we? Because you're saying you just use a text type instead of a blob type?
True. Yes. That'd be the equivalent of what I would do. Yeah.
I don't have children coming into my office now. I have my dog coming into my office.
Oh.
And he's a very large dog.
Nice.
I'm not sure what he's trying to do, but I've tried to. We're way off the rails now. But yeah, like a large text column, you wouldn't feel bad about, but a blob you do.
Yeah.
But aren't they the same thing? Because there's no limit to a text column, right?
Yeah, like I said, I think I'm just over that. No, I agree with you. Yeah. It's probably, like I said,
maybe you just probably feel bad because
because you can store byte data in there. Maybe it just feels weird.
Binary data.
Binary data. So it just kind of feels weird to me. But
yeah. I guess then it comes down to is it more efficient to store the binary data in the database and pull it back and have it and then send it because apparently you're probably going to send it down a pipe if we're web developers, right? We're gonna send it to the client, or to store a link to a file that then you either read in and stream out. It's what I wonder what the performance difference is in that.
This is something else to think about. I think we need to refactor our show a little bit. I think not saying we need to do this each week, but it'd be great. And you could bring in one of your colleagues or one of our past friends.
Guests now.
Well, because this conversation would be great if we did have a database administrator, professional who that was their primary job.
Or would they just have been like, this
because
is dumb?
Then both. What do you mean this is dumb? Because then we'd have two developers who, yes, we are familiar, we're aware of, but we need an expert in this area. That's their primary job. That's what they specialize in, and it'd be kind of fun to kind of ask them these questions, like, how do you feel about storing binary data into a database? What is the performance issues with that? Like I said, these are things that I worry about and I wonder about that I know I'm probably overthinking, but I'd be curious to have a conversation with somebody about that.
I feel like there's one problem in this new idea. We didn't even think we were going to talk about databases. we had no idea. In fact,
take some planning on our part.
Still trying to answer the question you asked me a minute 30 into the podcast. And it is 30 minutes into the podcast.
True.
Just so.
True.
So I was doing some SQL.
You're squealing. Let's get back to the squealing. Yeah.
And it was just there's a bunch of rows, some data we got. And
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, there's going to be 5 different types of values in here, right? It's not actually an enum field in the database, but it is effectively an enum. And there's, oh boy, wow, so many trails we can go down there. Like the idea is like, yes, we're storing enum data, but we're not making an enum field because the code controls the enum. The database doesn't, because can you imagine having to write a migration every time you're like, oh yeah, we have a new value here. It's like, no. And so anyway, so we store essentially a column that has a set of values. And I was just like, all right, I know how to do this kind of. Basically, I want, for a given range of time, give me all of the rows, but I want it summed by the value. And I know I can do that. And my normal way to do that would be to type it into Google and then click the first Stack Overflow link and then look at what they said, understand it, and apply it to my context, because they're going to be using different columns. So instead, I just hit ChatGPT and I'm like, hey, I've got this column name. I'm selecting a range of data. I want it summed by that. And I also want to know all the rows. And I was like, oh, you want to do this? And yep, totally did it.
There you go.
When I was doing the Slack programming to get to extract data from Slack, I was like, all right, we have this new format. We're using a Slack workflow. So the format says you're going to have like these words in this order and all that kind of fun stuff. And I was like, hey, ChatGPT, here's the format. Can you give me a regular expression to use in PHP that extracts the data? And it did it. And I tried it and I was like, that didn't work, bud. And it was like, oh, try this. And because I noticed, I'm like, hey, there's a bullet point. I don't think you captured that in your regular expression. And it said, oh, try this. And it did a completely different way that was even better. So yeah, I mean, that's what I'm using ChatGPT for. And that's the programming that apparently I'm doing. And it is that programming where it's just like, this is essentially example code or an answer in Stack Overflow that says how to write this regular expression, or regular expression, understanding how to parse things. But we did have a dev on the team that asked it a question about bitwise operations, and it gave it an answer that was wrong. It was like, how do I make this bitwise operation better? And it's like, oh, you can drop this, but it was wrong.
Which that actually happens a lot. Like if it gives you code, which I was doing that this week, where I recognize saying, okay, like it was from like a method. I can't remember what it was. It was something it was referencing a method that I was in the library, and I was trying to use. I was like, no, it needs like another parameter or something like that. It was something. Oh yeah, it was one of the arguments or parameter. It was just mismatching on what it was trying to give me. And I was saying, no, it needs this, and saying, oh yeah, this is the version. So I think there's like versioning issues with like the code they know about, especially when it comes to libraries. Because you're not really sure which version.
Logic math, it got wrong.
Well, I've heard about that too, which I haven't run into many issues like that. But yeah, just doing some basic arithmetic, I think that there's some issues with that.
Well, I mean, bitwise operations are not, I hope a little bit more advanced than arithmetic, because I can do the math pretty quick. I can add stuff, but bitwise does make me pause for a little bit and kind of look at it cross-eyed.
But doesn't this get you excited, Tim?
Well, yeah, because what we're saying is the thing that I would just have to go read and then be like, okay, all right, yeah, and I'll just that maybe I can have something do it for me. So there's that.
Because you also know how much time you save too.
Yeah. And I totally want to, because we got our schedule for who's kind of covering that channel where people ask us questions. And I haven't started actually implementing this, but just the other day, just to test it out, I was like, hey, given a Google Calendar, can you write me some PHP code that for whatever event is going on now, give me back all of the attendees? Because if it can give me back the attendees, and then I can go to Slack, and Slack has these things called, I forget actually what they call them. I want to say they're aliases or something like that, where you can say, if you mention this label, it will notify this set of people. And I can just say, oh, take this label that represents the on-call support dev, right? And have some type of cron job, right, that goes out and says, who's the attendee of the current event on the on-call calendar? Make sure that they are on that list in Slack. So it doesn't matter. You don't have to look at the calendar. You can just at support dev, boom, that person is going to get a notice of the whatever message you sent. And if I end up building and putting it together, it's probably going to be, 80% example code that ChatGPT spits out at me,
Yeah.
and then just wire it together with whatever things I have to do
Well,
to make it run.
that's
the way I
what
want it
we
to
as
run.
developers that's how we learn too. So we learn at before ChatGPT, we learned by looking at documentation
Yeah.
or Stack Overflow.
Yeah.
Where other code that other people have written, or example code, template code that we can kind of reference and source, and then we take that and adapt it to the problem that we're trying to solve. So now we just get to that faster. And that's crazy exciting, because now I'm like, because most of the time when I got frustrated programming was when you hit a wall of you feel like, okay, I know the language. The language is not the issue. It's understanding the system, right? It's understanding the system you're trying to build upon or work with. And it's just like, and it feels like, man, I wish I had like a developer who made the system, or somebody else who specializes in this, so I could talk to and like you, like I go to you every week, right, with API questions.
Yeah.
But have somebody as a resource. Now you have this, which like it speeds up that process of kind of working through issues. And it like I said, it's more enjoyable now, because then I feel like, okay, I'm not worried about if I do hit a wall. Okay, I can maybe try to, they may not give me the right answer, but at least maybe it will give me an answer that'll help me put me back in the right direction where I need to go.
Yeah. So like I mentioned, this is related. I've been doing more writing, because we talked about last week how I went through the same process I was putting my devs through, and identified, hey, that's what I want to do. That's the direction I want to go. I want to make sure that I've talked about doing more writing. I want to do more writing, make it part of my.
So is this management documentation that you're writing, or specs, or what are you writing?
Management documentation? No.
Well, you said it's for your developers.
No. The process I put my developers through of saying, what areas do you want to grow in? And then what are the next steps? I did that to myself and said, yep, I want to do more writing, specific technical writing. And the next step is just to do it, just to commit to doing 20 minutes a day of something that is not required for my normal responsibilities, like something I wouldn't had to write that day anyway. So like not somebody who's asking me like, hey, can you document this, or, explain how this works? Nope, that doesn't count. Stuff that is on kind of my backlog list, and, of things that I think I should do some writing on. So I've been doing that, and wrote a bunch about a set of traits that we open source. Haven't really talked a lot about it. But if you're a PHP developer, the request and response, there's a standard interface for HTTP requests and responses. We've talked about it before.
You're talking about the PSR?
Yeah, I'm talking about PSR 7. Yep. And it works great, right? There's a lot of value because it's a standard interface. If you're using third-party libraries and they say, well, do OAuth authentication based off a request or something like that, you've got a request. It doesn't matter which library you're using, as long as it follows that interface, and they can say like, oh, cool. If you're using, I can give me that request. I can pull whatever out of it I need to and tell you it's authorized and do whatever I need to do. If you want to use the middleware pattern of PSR15, it uses those interfaces. So you pass it around in your own code. Where it falls short a little bit is, what if the library that you're using or the PSR itself doesn't give you all the convenience methods that you want? Like, it gives you kind of a bare minimum of methods. Like, there is a get query params, which returns you an array of params. What if you want a much nicer kind of like get query param, and I give you a key and you give it back to me? So you don't give me an array all the time, just like, hey, yeah, I want to get the user ID from the query, and if it's not there, here's the default value I want. How do I add that? Like, I'm using a library that implements this interface. So I don't want to extend the library, because that gets weird, right? Because then my code's very tightly coupled to another.
Don't want a dependency.
Nope. Right. See, I want to be able to swap those dependencies without saying, oh, I got to rewrite all my code now that uses that. So the method that we used was, we built a bunch of traits that just satisfied, and traits in PHP world are like mix-ins in Ruby, I think, but not really. A
decorator?
Maybe. I mean, here's what it really is. In PHP world, it is copy pasting it into the class. Whatever class says use this trait, it's just like, here's the functions, copy them in. I mean, practically the implementation in the language is to say, if I have a little use and I give the trait name, whatever methods are in that trait just get copied into the file before it's evaluated.
So so the syntax for this is like at use above
Yeah, it's just use
the class or method. So it's a trait. Is it both for methods and classes, or just for classes?
You would build a trait that has a class-like structure,
Mm-hmm.
and when you use it in another class, you say I want to use this trait. It pulls in all the methods and properties from that.
But it's specifically to be used for classes.
Yes.
So you can't like pull it in. You can't make a trait for like a method.
No.
Okay.
No. It's behavior that basically a collection of methods you want to share between a bunch of classes that may not have an inheritance.
And then when you use it, it injects that into the class. Is that how it works? Okay.
Yep. Unless your class defines the same method name, then your class wins.
Okay, so take priority. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's really a pretty simplistic idea that just says you can share traits across classes without having to have an inheritance tree as well. It's how PHP would kind of deal with the notion of multiple inheritance, but it's not really multiple inheritance. So a lot of times we use traits to introduce behavior or bring in common behavior to satisfy an interface.
So PHP does have multiple inheritance?
No.
Oh, interesting. I don't know. I didn't know that.
You not inheritance. I mean, obviously you can implement a bunch of interfaces.
Yeah.
But inheritance tree is no, you only have a single parent. So we build a simple trait,
which that's a good thing. That's a good rule to follow, actually.
I tend to think it makes it less complex for sure.
Maybe because I remember when I was using a lot of PHP, I was just doing that just because of the framework that I was learning and using. That was just the way it was worked. I never actually thought about it. And then going into the other language where you have multiple inheritance and thinking, oh, I never really did that in PHP.
Yeah. So traits is kind of like our way of, you want behavior from multiple things. You want to compose behavior in a class, and you're not going to do it by actually injecting a bunch of different objects. You just want to compose static behavior, for lack of a better. It's not really static, but you know what I'm saying. Traits give us that opportunity. So we made a real simple trait that just said, one, the traits can declare methods they expect the whatever class brings them in to have. Trait can kind of do an abstract method of sorts and say, hey, I'm gonna define what this should look like. I'm gonna call it. I'm not gonna provide it. So we bring in a trait that says, I have all of the methods of PSR 7, which is the request or response, whatever it is. I have all those methods, but all I do is just ask the class for the thing I'm wrapping, and I call it on there. So you can say, all right, I'm going to make my own class that has this special method on it that I want. It's going to make it really convenient and easy and, nice for us developers to work with. I'm going to make it by just injecting another request into it, proxy all of the PSR, the interface methods to that, and then add my own. And now it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it doesn't matter what library I'm using. I just whatever you give me as the wrapped object, I wrap it and give new behavior, and it unlocked a lot of fun stuff.
Now, could you take this too far? Could you actually do like a trait upon a trait?
Oh yeah, in fact I do. Traits require traits.
From a performance standpoint, is there anything to be concerned about there? Or?
No, because again, it's at a compile time. I don't know if I want to say compile time, but when it's evaluated, those traits are just copy pasted in, and if you have op cache on, I'm pretty sure that.
So I'm curious how that works. So behind the scenes, does it basically merge that into one class in memory in a sense?
Yep.
So if you have like multiple, let's say two or three trait stacks, talk about function stacking. So you have those trait stacks that it basically merges us all into one object.
As far as yes, okay. I think so. Because like I say, I believe the implementation is just copy paste. So it's just like you're like, oh yeah, copy this code, copy, and now here's my actual class, and evaluate it and run it like you would. So I wrote an article that will probably be published eventually on how we built all this and why we built this and what it unlocked for us. And I fired up a ChatGPT thread. I was like, hey, ChatGPT.
Oh no, you had to write the article for you?
No. I said, hey, if I give you a link to an open source library, can you read the code and evaluate it? And it was like, yeah, Tim, I can totally do that for you. Just give me the link and make sure it's public so I can read it, because I can't have permissions and stuff to get to GitHub. I was like, no, it's open source. I'm going to give it to you right now. So I give it a link to our library that has all the traits, all the code. And then I said, all right, I wrote an article. I'm going to give that to you too. How's that sound? I'd like you to read it. And then I'm going to ask you some questions. And it's like, okay, cool. Give me the article. So I just pasted the whole thing in. And it's like, we're ready to go. What's next, bud? And I said, all right, in that article, I have a bunch
I wish you responded to you like that. What's up? What's next?
Yeah. In that article, I have a bunch of parentheses where it says, add example. I want you to look at the code that you already looked at, and then the article, and then give me some examples that would fit there.
There you go.
And it was terrible. It started giving me stuff. I should pull it up right now. It started giving me stuff like, it's JavaScript code. Like it read it, and I'm like, hey, I was like, whoa, First it gave me Python. First, it gave me Python code, treating my library, the HTTP tortilla library, as if it was a client.
It's thinking like, why are you using PHP, Tim? You should be using Python or JavaScript. Aren't you a real developer?
Apparently, it was.
And that's what ChatGPT is thinking of you.
Yeah, and I had to correct it a couple times. I'm like, no, this is just a set of traits. This isn't even a client.
It has a built-in bias
client
against PHP. I think we found it.
I know, and it in the end, it started spitting out like, you want to require HTTP or tortilla. I don't know why, because it's JavaScript, and then they're doing const response equals await request. I mean, that doesn't sound like my code, that's for sure. It was horrible, and it's like, yep, because behind the scenes, I mean, I don't know, it's large language model. What all is it? It's a big decision tree with a lot of information it's gleaned.
Well, it would be
some bad decisions.
It would be super interesting if you did this. Try this with the version 4.
I do. That's.
Then see what the response is like, and compare and contrast the two responses. That'd be great to see.
We are back to where we started. Yes. When you said ChatGPT4, I was like, I think I should try that.
Yeah.
Because I want to see if it understands it better.
Yeah.
I'm genuinely curious. That's what's making me think it might be worth throwing $20 their way just to give it a shot and see if it can evaluate this. Because and again, I don't use it as much as other people do, so I don't know if there's better prompts I should be giving it to try to explain to it. All right, I want you to read each paragraph, and I want you to look at the context around my little example prompt, and give me an example that relates to the paragraph that is right preceding. I didn't give it all that instruction because I'm trying to treat it like I think it wants to be treated. Like I'm having, you know what I'm saying? Like when I say it wants to be treated, the researchers that are working on it want me to treat it as if I'm just having a conversation that I would have with a developer.
Yeah,
because I could 100% have done that and sent that to any PHP developer and been, hey, read this. Oh, I know what traits are. Okay, I see what you're doing there. Read this article. All right. Write me example code for that. And it wouldn't be necessarily the example code I would use, but especially when we got to some of the more complex stuff. But even a basic one, I'm like, this isn't, what are you doing here? You completely misunderstood everything. And yeah, I'm interested in seeing what would happen if I would run that on ChatGPT 4.
So since you've been doing some actual development this week, some coding, even if you're just looking at some squeal code and just doing thinking about it,
just doing some squealing.
So getting into the hot, spicy topic that I wanted to, since we have about 10 minutes left here.
How did we do that? This flew by, and I wanted to talk about, because with the writing,
we're never going to get to it,
because the article that I wrote about this library that we're have open source, just haven't talked about it much. Is one of the talks I'm giving at PHP Tech. So writing that is then helping me in the preparation of that talk and kind of cluing me in, like, okay, the direction I want to go with this talk is probably just live code. I want to, so it means we're gonna have to write some example code where we have request and response in a very simple application and be like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if, and then this is how HTTP Tortilla lets you just build your own request and response models. And here's, I don't know, you may find this, I found this fascinating when the dev team started doing this. We throw exceptions that, because of the trait, are also an HTTP response. So we'll throw an exception, and up the stack of the application, it will catch it and be like, hey, is that exception also a response object? Then just give it back to the user. So our exceptions are able to represent themselves.
But you're throwing exceptions not for errors. You're throwing based on the response, based on the responses you are.
No, they're an error.
Look,
So say it's an API request comes in. I'm like, hey, that user's not found. Throw a user not found response exception,
okay.
which is an exception. That's what it is. It is the class's exception, but we also implement the response interface because we throw the trait in, and all we do is in the constructor of the exception, we create the response that
I got you.
a 404 not found response, right? And we just say, hey, that's what I'm wrapping. The thing I just created, wrap that. So anybody who gets this thing, they don't have to say, oh, it's an exception, and now I have to figure out how to represent this exception to the user, or as an API error. And we have some class that goes, oh, I noticed it's a 404. I make the 4. No, the exception is the response. So we're doing I think some pretty cool things, and I'm just gonna, So writing that has helped me discover, yes, for this talk, I think the right approach is not a good, not a big presentation type thing, but is very much a live code. Let's show it in use. And so writing this article helps me discover that. I've also been doing a decent amount of writing as to how we build APIs internally. And me and another dev at PhoneBurner are giving a talk on how the hypermedia format and how we practically use it at PhoneBurner. So all the brain dump of writing I've done there has helped me realize how that talk is going to be structured. So it's been, so this is where we get to function stacking, right? I'm doing one thing that's important and hopefully is good. As I write documentation, it's helping me think about these talks that I'm giving and further refine them. But also, as I write the documentation for my team, it's making it better from the team. And as I get more into the habit of writing technical documentation, I'm getting better at the tooling that we use internally, which is Confluence. And it's kind of new for us. So I'm getting better at the tooling and how I'm using that. So there's so much value coming from this exercise because we're able to stack the functional value of this one exercise. So we get value in a bunch of different areas. So it's been a good week, I think.
So since it's been a good week,
I didn't make that go long enough. I need to go a little bit longer.
And you've been working with your developers.
Oh no!
I was curious, and this kind of popped in my head because I was thinking about. Remember when Mark Zuckerberg was talking about, like, right before all the big layoffs happened, and he was starting to complain how the fact of, like, we had too many managers. We had too many managers who are not committing code, who are not participating, not being contributors. And
this is gonna come as a surprise to probably, I think, a lot of people. I don't really listen to what Mark Zuckerberg says, so I don't remember him saying that, but I'm going to trust that if you're saying he's saying it, he said something like it.
But, well, okay. I don't listen to him a lot, but once he starts actually saying stuff I actually like, I'm like, oh, actually he's making some sense here. Actually, I totally agree. That's what's something about Mark is interesting. We're like, if he has a lot of freedom, he just goes crazy in a sense where he goes down, tries to do VR for everything and just tries to go down routes where, like, he shouldn't really be going down. But once he has constraints put on him, he's really, really good. Like, he makes sense. He's smart and he actually does some things. So he was, like, talking about the fact, like, yeah, we have too many managers, our developers, or not enough active contributors.
Okay.
Our managers don't know how to write code anymore. And that was actually a theme that was starting to be relayed in the industry.
Yeah.
And that's why we also saw a lot of managers got laid off. Like in all these companies, like, it wasn't just,
managers
customer service or even just entry level developers. It was a lot of managers got laid off. So I was thinking about
that I used to write code type of thing.
Yes. So where do you fall on lines on the line of, from a pay scale of developers versus managers?
Wow, what topic are we going to hear now?
I know we don't have time because it's going to end now, and I won't be able to really flesh this out with you. But thinking about managers, because the route for the career path for developers.
Yeah.
Is usually, and was traditionally the case of, like, okay, developers, they want to develop for, let's say,
there's no
between 5 to 10 years. We're saying, okay, they want to start to progress into the managerial role, which I thought too when I first started developing. I looked at managers like they're the ones who make the money, right? Developers get paid good, but at the same time, if you really want to make money, you have to level up and you have to start managing other developers.
Do they?
Well, that's what I saw.
I mean, I'm asking that from a genuine curiosity. Like you knew it?
As in, like, they got paid more?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. No, like that's fine. That's fine.
No, because
Because not all the time is that public information.
well, it's true. It depends based on, well, maybe the companies I was at, maybe I don't know. But
I'm sure you could go to like Indeed or some of the hiring sites and be like, let me Google a senior software position and see what the pay scale is, and let me do a engineering team lead, or and see what the pay scale is there, and you can kind of get a feel from that from the industry.
But then is it that, okay, so think about that. So is it, if we'll just assume that that's the case, that managers get paid more than developers.
Okay.
Do you think that's right? Or where do you fall in lines of like when, that is a good thing or bad thing, or I don't know.
Well, we've got 4 minutes left. So this is gonna be a real interesting conversation that we may have to continue next week. And I was not prepared to answer at all, but let's give it a shot. One thing, I think it is not good for our industry to consider that the only upward path that we have is to go from being a developer to a manager.
Yep.
There are developers that should not be managers. And for them to feel like that is the only way to make more money seems like it is bad for our industry. Right? Yep. So and that's kind of, I think, a roundabout way to answer your question. Or maybe you shouldn't hit a ceiling where the only way you can make more is to become a manager. Because let's ask the questions, right? Like if we want to adopt the problem solving tools that we're supposed to use while we're writing code, why does a manager make more money? Why does anybody make money?
Well, some would say they have more responsibility because they're managing a product, they're managing multiple projects, they're managing other developers who are then they're responsible for the code that they write or the updates that they're making. So I could see the sense of like, if you have more responsibility and if your output is based upon the output of the people underneath you and that's your value, I can see like the value of all the developers underneath you builds your own value. I can see the point of that, but that's bad.
Value, right? Like, it's what value are you providing the company?
Yeah.
And then let's ask another question. Are there situations in a company where you look at a dev team of who knows how many? Let's just throw a number out. Let's say 7 developers, right? And 1 manager. That seems about right. Maybe, I don't know. There's got to be situations where you would ask whatever the management, you go up the chain to the exec level and say, which would have a more detrimental effect on the team, on the company? Having to replace that manager or having to replace one specific developer? Don't just say like a developer, but like that one right there. And if the company says, whoa, no, I would rather replace the manager than that single developer right there, because of what? Because of the impact they have.
Yeah.
So then why are you paying someone who has less impact on the company more, if indeed you have set up the structure that says we've got these we're almost out of time. I can't believe it. We set up the structure that says, that this level you make this much, and then you this level, and then you hit this top, and then the next step has to be management. Is that really right?
Yeah.
Is there more value there?
So the money was the first thing I thought about, just because of like I said, I'm kind of thinking about a career change myself. So how much money do I want to make, and what are the options around that? But also from a coding perspective, how much code do you think a manager should do on a team? Like how much of that should be a percentage of time? That's what we could probably talk about next week. It would actually be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a great topic, because like right now I want to do more than I'm doing.
Yeah.
Right? Because then the question is, what's the manager there for? What is your job responsibility? That probably changes from company to company.
Yeah.
But if you're supposed to be helping your team write code, then shouldn't you be contributing to it at least a high level? Shouldn't you be helping understand the patterns? Shouldn't you be, I don't know. I think it's different teams have different dynamics. And I guess this will be. What should the title for next week? Show me the money? Is that what you want to talk about?
Do managers code?
Do managers code? I think the question is, do managers code well?
Yeah, that's the case where you just, wait till the end, and that's why I finally get to my topic.
That was reminiscent of some past shows where we just went all over the place.
Well, it's interesting. Like I said, both of us were working on databases this week, so that's why, it's kind of like, oh yeah, it's kind of we're in sync now. That was kind of cool.
I mean, working on databases, I was trying to find a couple queries, but yeah. and I decided a computer could do a better job than me.
And like I talked about, it actually brought me back to how much, I miss actually doing my squealing. I miss doing that. I was like, I remember I haven't done a select statement forever, and I was like, wow, this is actually kind of cool and fun. I was like, and it brought back so many memories. Because like we talked about, it's been abstracted away, and I've been doing a lot of key value NoSQL stuff lately. So getting back to the relational database is actually pretty enjoyable.
For those that have stayed with the stream and are listening, it may seem like we structure that in such a way that Mark teases a very interesting and thought-provoking topic, and then we intentionally make you listen to us ramble until we answer the last 10 minutes. We didn't plan any of that, just so you know. That was just how things roll.
And it's fine. This issue too. There's people. I think if anybody listens to us, I think there's definitely a drastic what's the word? A variation, not the word variation, but there's a gap. There's a big gap between the two people. Either people are going to hate us or love us because of how we don't structure anything. We just just have conversation.
I know.
But that's what I wanted to do with you each week, was just like we used to meet. Remember we used to meet? It was on Friday or Sunday. I don't know. Remember we used to meet like for coffee or something like that for like with a group of guys. Yeah, well, we have the radio show. We did the radio show back at on the South Side on NCC's campus. Yeah. That was just fun, just to kind of get and to catch up and just kind of talk about some developer stuff.
We did it at Fab Lab. Yeah.
So I think there's people who would listen to a couple developers just kind of ramble and just kind of talk to, that they're just kind of catching up and just kind of just hashing things out. But then there's other people who just when they want to hear very structured, let's say they know that the title of the show is basically what they're going to be talking about. They're not going to deviate from it. And it's going to be a very outline based dialogue that's going to happen.
Yeah, that's not us. That's not the show.
Yeah.
Two things. Maybe I don't know if we'll get to them next week. Those of you who are listening and still watching this live stream, remind us, tweet at us next week to remind us to do this. I probably won't forget this. The Flipper 1 back in stock. Briefly.
The Flipper? You mean the Flipper? The Flipper device. Is it Flipper 1? Is that what that's called?
That's what it was.
Flipper. I know. That's the name. Yeah. Yeah, it's back in stock. You're gonna grab it. You're gonna start hacking around your
out for delivery. It'll be here today.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I need to get the Wi-Fi dev board once they get that back in stock.
Because I know are you still thinking about setting up like little kind of smart stations around your farm?
Yeah, that's
and then go around the Flipper and start communicating with your devices around the farm.
There you go. But I'll have that to play with, and then I've been playing with Stable Diffusion. Like actually not just the free web things, but like spin up a pre-installed server that charges I think $1 an hour or something to run, which obviously I turn off every time I'm not using it. But playing with some of their stuff, because like ControlNet, where you can give it sketches and then it'll use those as the shapes and stuff. Just because I'm trying to lay out presentations. And it's like, well, I could kind of sketch what I want, but I want to see a better version of it. And have been playing with that a little bit because I'm putting together some of those talks and it's like sketch the idea and then maybe send it to Stable Diffusion especially if it's like you can find the elements in different.
Are you just looking for diagrams or like wireframes?
Like I tend to
because I know the text I was always bad at, so that's why I didn't know. Like, is that outputting text into your? Based on your sketches?
No. I'm just saying, like, I want I have a sketch that's like I want a cloud and then a browser and then a contract document in the middle. That's like the high level for explaining how
a diagram. Yeah.
And I can find some of those elements online, but they may not match the same style. So if I can put them together as line art and then be like, hey, Stable, make it hand drawn and maybe add some color to it, just like little subtle colors. Has it gotten better job? Because the one thing I haven't really dealt
delved into too much, especially the Mid Journey. I think at my school, my colleague Jason Zul, Jason Zul,
Yeah.
he's super into Mid Journey. He's like really into it.
Because Mid Journey is just text
Yeah.
to image, and
So
I
what he
play
likes
with
to do is he likes to do it as like a base, just like we do for coding for ChatGPT. He
Mhm.
uses it as a base, and then he'll vectorize it, and then modify that artwork or design, and then do something original with it.
I
So
like that a lot. That pattern.
So because he's really good at that by knowing which design he can vectorize and then knowing what he can modify with it. So he's super into that. But I haven't gotten too much of that because of the what's the word, the not it's because it doesn't remember your like it, so it gives you a piece, right? And so you say, give me that exact version.
There's no history now.
There's no history. Yeah. That's why I'm like, once they build that into it, you could actually go back to your history and then be able to kind of do revisions on a specific point. Then I'll probably dive into it a little bit more.
That's what. So my initial perspective on Stable Diffusion is I didn't like it at all, because when you gave it text prompts, it gave you weird images. I was like, I don't know this. And it's probably whatever free web UI I was using as well that rate limited you and all that kind of fun stuff. But the plugins, since Stable is open source, the plugins and the other models that you can throw in it, ControlNet it's not a model for the generation, it's a model for the input almost. So you could sketch out like a really quick mountain scene, like mountain and a lake here, and then describe it, and it will use that structure, that composition in the photo that it makes. And then with Stable, you can be like, all right, that's great. Now I want to use that picture as the background. And then I want to, again, with using ControlNet, use Open Pose to take a stick figure and put it where you want it, and be like, put an astronaut there.
Yeah.
And it'll just kind of merge the two images together. It's some variation, depends on how much strength you give the original image, right? It'll be like, oh, I'll take this as the background. This will be the pose. You're saying it's an astronaut, and that, everything that you can't kind of keep using the same prompts to build on, but you have the control, unlike Midjourney, where it's just a chat bot, and like you said, with no memory. Yeah. And you're just like asking it for the picture again, and the random seed is, random.
Yeah.
So
once they improve the interfaces, I even think with ChatGPT, like their web interface is horrible in the sense. And actually, I think, man, I would love this tool to work this way. Like because I like actually having the previous conversations. So I have like I renamed them to the topic that I talked about, so I can kind of always go back and reference, because I think it does a pretty good job of remembering that thread. So if you go back, if I asked it some Git issue, like some Git kind of understanding how Git base first merge worked, and kind of and go back to that thread, it'll remember. Even if I went back to it a month ago, it'll still reference what was previously in that thread. So I really like that part of it. But just once you start having a lot of conversations, the management of those conversations just gets to be really wonky and bad. And so I think the interfaces definitely need to get improved. And same thing with Midjourney. I don't like using through Discord, but once they build, and I think they're working on that, they're building a better web app, better front end for it. Once they have that and have some history built into it, that'll be interesting.
Yeah. So I'm playing with that. It's because what I want is I you've seen some of my presentations in the past. I had one of the Kutztown students illustrate it, and I want to be able to just quick sketch an idea and then be like, use that style, and fill in the blanks for me. And there's a lot of Stable Diffusion, not like a preview that some site's giving you, but like when you dig into what you can do it with the web UI. Or you can use Python if you want to do it directly, right? But it has a lot of that potential. So I'm impressed with that. So
as long as they can stay in business.
Yeah, I don't even know. I forget who Stable is.
No, I know that. I think it was what Getty was suing them. I don't know. The lawsuits are starting to pile up now. So we'll see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, and it's all about the model, right?
Yeah,
where do they train their models on? So, alrighty,
all right.